Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome in. We are going to be talking about the evolution of secure access and the adjacent SonicWall products, Cloud Secure Edge, CSE. Really today, we're going to focus on why secure access needs to evolve and why, maybe the way you've been doing it or the way it's been done in the past isn't good enough. And I have the privilege of being joined by our very own CIO, CISO, Wayson Vannatta. Wayson, you want to say hi to everybody?
Hey everybody, thanks for having me today, JT, and looking forward to chatting about a very important topic within this space. So yeah, happy to be here.
Wayson, we're talking about this conversation that, work isn't necessarily like in an office. I'm working from my home. I think you're working from your home. And, most of our customers and our partner community, they're supporting some sort of like hybrid work. And that brings a new host of problems, right? So maybe from your perspective, just, what are some of those challenges that you've seen and what's that transition look like in your career?
Yeah, well, certainly, I mean, most of us, 5 years ago got hit by, the pandemic and then so all of a sudden, work from home became, something we all had to adjust to. And certainly, yeah, I think the early on challenges and things were around, okay, how do we mobilize? And, I think I was lucky in that we had already used VPN. We already had things in place that we start to use collaboration tools like Teams. And so, just we kind of really telling people like, hey, just click that one button for video. We're going to all of a sudden have video chats and those kinds of things. And, so certainly you had those challenges and stuff, in terms of, what you have to deal with early on. And for some, it was a longer journey, for others, it might not have been. But certainly setting that up, was a challenge, was some of the initial challenges, right?
Sure.
During that transition, right? And, how do you do that, right? It was kind of the early parts to that. And so
one of the funny things is like, there was that initial rollout of Zoom and those apps and like the remote work apps, and then there was the Zoom bombing. I remember there was all those like public companies that didn't have password secured things, and you'd have random people joining like the Coca-Cola board meeting or whatever. So I think like there's some of those stories we were talking about before, which are just a shift in people's perspective maybe on some of these products.
Yeah. And it was just trying to get used to all of that, right? But then like you started to realize once you got over all of that and you got all that set up, right? And then you start to realize like, wait a minute, like, what are employees like? Wait, they're dialing in and okay, wait, they're on their, their home network. Okay, wait, who's on that network and how did they set it up? And then you start to kind of wonder like, wait a minute, some folks don't even need to come to the office resources anymore via VPN, right? They go straight to, most folks on Microsoft, you go straight to that. Or if you're on Google, you go straight to that. So you don't really need to go into the network like before everything passed through the firewall. And so you start to realize like, wait a minute, those things are, okay, well, what's happening there? Then you go back to that time frame, SaaS is by that point, right? So software as a service, those kinds of applications have taken off, right? And like everything, it's huge there, right? And when you look at, I always kind of look at SaaS and you look at those things, if you kind of, you see some of the things that help you kind of give you visibility into your projects or maybe kind of collect your notes. There's those type of things, but there's also the ones that bolt on to your CRM or your financial systems, right? You have all these bolt-ons, and when you start realizing that's gold information in your, your customer data and then your financial data, those are high on the list in terms of applications you're concerned with. Then you start realizing, wait a minute, you got all this stuff bolted on, and and then you lose, like, there's a lot for, if you kind of remember, for those of you who are back in the office and but when you're out of the office, you missed out on those conversations in the hallway. It was a lot easier. You're able to run down the hall and kind of clarify something. And so you get a lot more reach out, at least where the environments I had been in, it's the help desk and IT were kind of really centralized. So, it was easy for people to come over and clarify things. But then when you went home and everybody just kind of just went in their own corners. And so, you're certainly worried about like, wait, like, what is going on?
That's so hard. And like you're talking about those bolt-ons, that's one of those ones that I've seen, like individual departments. It's almost like IT kind of got fractured. So a lot of our customers, they started letting like heads of departments make decisions on these software tools, especially when it's SaaS. Like, we don't have to deploy anything. And this thing's basically free because they look at our entire customer record and then they run some data analytics against it and they're selling that back to some other company. Like, I don't think that there was a lot of oversight during that kind of period of time. And so a lot of decisions got made about software tools that were maybe business driven, but not security driven. And, I don't know from your perspective, but we hear occasionally from our customers that security is playing a little bit of a catch up, which is like, yeah, work from home was great and remote connectivity was excellent and ability to be, global as a company is cool, but we didn't really invest the same time, effort, and energy in like making sure that we're following business practices that we had when we were in the office.
Yeah, there was such a rush to get out, right? And it's such a huge change. And then you kept thinking you're going to come back, and it's a couple more months, and oh, this is the norm now. Yeah, so yeah, it presented just a lot of different.
That genie's not back. So like, it's not going back for the most part, right? Like from your perspective.
I think the flexibility is always going to be there now, right? And then there's just, I think for some organizations, I mean, there's plenty that just went full time work from home, right? Full time. At all. So in those cases, there's definitely a lot of folks out there, right, that's in that situation. Yeah.
These legacy solutions, things like virtual private networks, VPNs, or maybe just some of the traditional like security tools that businesses had when people worked in the office, as the explosion happened, people working remotely, SaaS applications, what shifted there that maybe some companies don't realize or haven't realized or are just starting to realize?
Yeah, I think is what I briefly mentioned earlier, right? What people are actually doing, right, on the networks, and what are they using in terms of traffic, and then like you also couple this with where like what threat actors, how they evolved, right, and what they're starting to do. And so when you look at like many of us when I first started, or even maybe 10, 15 years ago, right, the focus was on your DMZ, where's that line, and that's what you were protecting, and those type of things were certainly front and center. And then identity, we talked about SaaS, right? So the other thing that changed with SaaS is like identity became a thing, and all you need is just someone's credentials, and once you got in, and you could maneuver from there. So those type of things change, and so as threat actors evolved, right, that took off, and then like look, like this past year, like VPNs have just been under attack, right, all over. Not just all companies that have it have been under attack, and so you can kind of see where threat actors shift their focus and sort of changed. And so you have all these convergences of things coming into play, with really understanding all of that. And then like the other things I would say too is this: the complexity behind things for us is hard to maintain. I'll mention, you said you kind of gave me some insight about who's on the webinar. So many of you are sitting in my shoes too as well, right? How do you do more with less? Costs, all the different types of costs you have to manage, right? And how do you get all this visibility? So there's there's a lot, I'm biased, but I think running IT is one of the most difficult things to do. I mean, everybody's got their challenges, but man, we just get it from a lot of different angles, right? And then threat actors don't stop, right? So to me, you have to constantly try to be ahead and stay with them. And so like evolving and like constantly looking at new technologies, it's a must-have today, right? You absolutely have to do those things.
Yeah, I think one thing we talked about, like I put VPNs on here as kind of a point, which is a lot of the clients we talk to, the initial conversation kind of is anchored around they were using some traditional VPN, maybe that's SSL VPN or IPsec client-to-site VPNs to access their data. And they're like, well, is this like a modern VPN? And I always phrase it like it is, but also it's much more than just that, right? You blended a couple of things there. Identity, you're talking about lateral movement. We talk about like trust profiling or trust scoring. So all of those things combined with also providing the tunnel for access is what like the modern zero trust network access product offers, right? For SonicWall, we call that cloud secure edge. But like, from your perspective and maybe some of the peers that you have in the industry, how do you maybe communicate that to the business decision makers, and how do you guys evaluate security tools when it comes to, hey, we have this legacy solution. We want to get this new thing because it looks really cool or it's the shiny new object, but we've got to balance the two. Like what's that decision-making process look at a high level, and how do you kind of go about thinking about migrating to new technology?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things, right? Like, so certainly one, the team, the team itself who implements it, right, is understanding how things are changing, just always being aware of that. And then what type of tools can you use to help combat that? Certainly understanding that area there. I think another thing I do, and that I would highly encourage everyone here to do, is like, look, at the end, there's always a budget, right? That's the crazy thing with security, is how do you balance that, right? You have all this risk coming at you, and then you have limited budget, and so how do you balance that? And so I think one of the things that I would say to everyone is like, really get to know and meet frequently. I do it with our CFO, right? And explaining, hey, this is what we're seeing on a monthly basis. Here's where we're wanting to go. I always try to get ahead as far as, like, in the next 6 months, the things that are likely to kind of impact us. And so I found through the years, building a relationship with your CFO or whoever, you're the person in your organization that's at the end of responsible for money there, is just sharing what is the reality of what's happening, how things are changing. I kind of look at, like, historically what's happened in the past in this area, and then where it's evolving. So I think really bringing in and showing that, would be an area too that I've really leaned on a lot in terms of trying to introduce. So when you introduce new things, or you go to ask for more budget, those are things that I definitely use on a regular basis, right? Is to make sure that folks are definitely aware. I mean, everybody kind of hears of things, but, like, how does it impact us really? I think if you're not in front of that with them, you're really not giving yourself. It'd be a little difficult for you to because what I'm saying is, you don't want to constantly go to, like, oh, this big thing, I need money for this. Oh, I need money for that. It's a security thing, right? And so I think when you start laying out a plan and you start really sharing what the realities are, I think you're actually more likely to get more money, instead of constantly with this fear of security, right? So, but it requires.
We're talking about something that our best partners that are successful do, and I think our best customers do that, which is there's a plan and, like, a measure to it, which is, hey, we have these objectives, right? We want to be compliant with XYZ controls, or we want to have XYZ visibility. And in order to get there, here's the things we think we're going to need, and here's the budget we think we're going to need. And it's never right? I mean, there's stuff that changes and priorities shift for the business. But I do think that, post-COVID remote work, a lot of that got thrown onto IT, unfortunately, to solve. Right. And, I see a lot of our customers are operators, and they get drugged down into, like, the day-to-day, and they're focused so heavily on, like, solving problem that's right in front of them that the medium-term problem never gets addressed. And so there's more and more of those, like, fires that they start putting out, and those costs keep ratcheting up. So I think that piece you're sharing about trying to get a little bit ahead of it, start to have a plan, at least a vision for what it can look like. Those are, I'll say, our most successful customers, just from, like, buying our product, but also implementing it and getting an outcome.
Yeah, no, definitely. I can see that. Yeah,
that's a good comment. One thing that's came up on here, I have it bullet pointed there at the bottom, which, modern attack surface, personal apps, tools. You had, like, a really cool story about like a third-party, like, AI tool, right? We're in the world of AI, so we have to, for search engine optimization purposes, mention AI in this conversation. But what you're talking about, Grammarly, maybe you can give the audience that story about some visibility into a tool that otherwise would have been hard to see.
Yeah. So I think one of the benefits that CSC brings is, right, is that CASB. It's kind of got a little different definitions, but it's really highlighting, which is one of the things we wanted, right? I mentioned earlier, right, the SaaS apps. There's so many of them today, and so the tool it helped us identify these applications that folks are using, and like if you ever looked at those lists, like some of the names, you know, some of them you've certainly seen and heard of, and some of the big players. But then there's always these small ones. You're like, oh, what the heck is that? And what are, you know? So you go look them up, and then you realize, we started to realize, like, people, you know, we were like using these freemiums, and so we'd contact people and like, what is this tool for, and what are you doing with it? How long have you been using it? And then we started to find out, like, there's these freemium versions. And look, as long as the word freemium's been around, if you, I don't know if it's an old saying, or I don't know who said it, or, you know, but I've heard it for a lot of years, is, so if you're not paying for the product, then you are the product, right? And so whatever you put in there is becomes a property of someone else. And what we started to find out that was interesting was that a lot of these freemium versions, from even well-known companies, right, that you have paid versions and you have freemium versions, that they actually use your data to train their AI. And let's be real, like, you know, are people really being conscious of, you know, watching what they put into some of these tools, or watching what they say, especially on the AI front and things like that? Like, you know, are they really redacting certain things? I mean, they're not, right? And a lot of folks just don't even think about it, right? So they're putting into this freemium things, you know, what that they're using, as we're finding out, is putting in information, and then the companies start training off of that. Or like, I've seen other cases where, you know, like virus scanning tools and stuff, you can use it. It's a great idea to go scan, but if you're not paying attention, they own that thing that you scanned. And if they publicly post it up, or they use it in different ways, I mean, again, these are just things that you just don't want to, you know, certainly be caught up in. And so I think, you know, for us, we start to realize, like, man, this is really, you know, something that we need to be very conscious of, and then we need to educate our users on. And so, again, kind of going back to, right, a lot of the focus, you know, that with CSC allowed us to actually, you know, not get our hands around these apps, and then bring some insight back to us. So
you talk about building that plan. It's like, how could you plan for something if you don't even know what you're planning for, right? I talk to some organizations now, and it's like, do you have an acceptable use policy? It's like, yeah, the same one that we used in 2009. And you're like, but like, what's your acceptable use for AI? Like, well, as long as it's like, you know, like, no way, man. Like, you all need to be aware of what risks are available. And now some businesses, maybe there's not sensitive data and you don't care.
Yeah.
But I don't know. There's a lot of businesses where that's probably not the case.
No, definitely. And in fact, you know, on top of that case too, just some other like interesting things for us. So we understood hey, we wanted visibility in the SaaS, but I would say, like, under CSC, the things that have been quite pleasantly surprised with and happy with, and we've used to our advantage, is just like the security posture, right? And so if you're not familiar with that, where it helps you, that you know, for those on the call, that I really gonna take a look at, is like, you can start setting your posture levels, right? So kind of your trust levels, right? So high, medium, and low levels. And so, for example, like something like your financial system and CRM I talked about earlier, right? There's gold in there for threat actors. So you put a high bar on access, right? So only certain people only certain users obviously can use the app. That's obvious. But then your laptop, for example, has to meet certain criteria along with that, right? So we all have the employee that turns off auto updates or disables your antivirus or your EDR, whatever they can, because it's stalling the system. You have all those kind of techie people that tweak with the laptops, and
so the person can only work from their iPad.
Yeah,
they only feel comfortable on like a tablet.
Yeah, exactly. So, but when you turn off auto update, that lowers your trust score. And what that does is it means you can't get to a certain app, right? So you go from a high to a medium. Well, in order to get to the financials, you need to be high. So you're not getting in, and then you're calling IT to say, how come it doesn't work? And we can see, oh, you shut off auto update, leave it alone. Right. So this is the tools that we get back in our hands to help enforce things that, you know, I like. And then, I don't know, for those of you on the call too, who like, we're a multi OS shop, right? Where we have Mac and Windows. And so even then, you know, that takes different settings, because you have things like File Vault in a Mac, for example, or, you know, just different things that Windows doesn't have. So you can set certain criterias within there too as well. So we've been really pleasantly surprised in terms of like being able to really tailor that. So, which by the way goes all the way. We didn't say it on the call, but it's really what the topic is about, right? Is that whole zero trust, right? Approach to having never trust, always verify. So those are great examples of like how you're not trusting it until you get verified, right? And so those have been like things that have come in really handy outside of the need for just having this visibility, just being able to kind of zero down on that. I think those are great examples. Like your one-time capture VPN access to everything days, right? That had its place. Don't get me wrong. It's still as long as it's packaged with MFA, it still works in some situations, most certainly. But go back to
a big long Ethernet cord from your office to my office, and let me just plug in. That's what everybody like initially has. But that's one of those business conversations. I think you do a really good job of tying. Like if you told like the financial decision makers at a company, hey, our current product is like running a long extension cord out to these people, and anyone can use it, versus like our next product is a security checkpoint at the airport, and you kind of gave that analogy of like, this is what we're getting. We're able to inspect who it is and why they're here, and then also what they're going to do. Are you coming into the office just to check your email? Or are you coming into the office to access our financial services? And depending on that, be more strict. I mean, it's a huge differentiator for technology and the services.
Yeah, definitely.
One thing we talked about prior to was a little bit around like maybe the shift in requirements around the trust score. You kind of started to allude to it, like, the ability to have high, medium, low trust. I don't think, most of the customers I talk to, they haven't done that, or maybe they haven't even like started the groundwork because that's not a function of the product they currently have. So, from the audience perspective, when you're thinking about technology tools, if you're getting new features, how do you help balance that with your team?
Yeah, like most IT shops, we think we know it all, so we just go in and dive in, and we don't read manuals and we don't plan well, right? But this one, it requires a little bit of thinking, right, and really trying to understand what does your environment look like, and what are your goals, and I think it puts a lot back into your org to kind of really control a lot of like, okay, well, how do we want to set these thresholds and stuff. And so I think getting back in and doing that, really you do need to do some planning around and thinking about how you want to set up those thresholds, and you can tweak along the way, right? And we tend to be, and like, this is nothing new, but I mean, I assume most of you follow this too, right? This crawl, walk, run kind of approach, certainly helps you in getting to, getting these kind of applications kind of rolled out, or these type of things kind of in a place. So those would be things that I look at doing, right?
I mean, I think that's one of the things I hear probably most from our clients is like, again, I haven't found a customer yet. We're working on it that has the infinite money tree, but if I do, that'll be a good day. But one of the challenges that they have is a lot of technology solutions. You kind of have to buy everything out the gate. You have to start with the whole package, and like you're just paying a premium price for this full solution. You got to license every user. I think one thing that SonicWall, I'm really impressed with our team, has been able to do is we've got it all the way down to like per user licensing, and we've broken apart some of the mechanisms so that there's an on ramp for people to get to a certain objective, and then the ability to expand that product once they're in the ecosystem. They don't have to deploy a second agent. It's software as a service delivered. But for those clients that are consuming the product, they're not having to buy more technology than they need out the gate, and they can kind of tailor it to where they're at as a business. So we've done a really good job, I think, as an organization of providing.
Yeah, definitely.
One thing I wanted to hit on before we get too far away from it was this. You talked about an analogy, and enterprise customers, and I don't say enterprise, I'm talking about like Global 500, Fortune 1000, whatever. Like most of them have made the transition to zero trust, and they've made that transition some time ago, right? It's not a new technology for them. But what's I think we're in the midst of is this shift towards zero trust network access being maybe approachable and affordable to mid-market customers and the SMB. And you had a really good analogy around the transition from antivirus, AV, to EDR. So maybe just walk folks through kind of your thought process on that, and maybe in a way to help them communicate with their organization why this transition's kind of needed.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I draw a lot of parallels with that transition, right? So I think when you look back, somewhere like 2014, 2015, I think that's when I believe a lot of, and I'll stay away from names, but a lot of very big companies got into trouble with breaches and stuff where it was around because they had antivirus, right? So I was, again, 2014, 2015. So, but by 2017, 18, I believe, somewhere in that neighborhood, you start seeing EDR start kind of getting some traction. You start hearing those terms. It's all in, those online publications starts mentioning them more and more. And then by 2020, it's kind of like full mainstream, right? And so that evolution in there, why did that happen, right? The threats were simple file-based malware, signature-based stuff before. That's what your antivirus did. Well, things got more evolved and got more and more complex, right? Threat actors shifted, right? And so I talked about earlier, just SSL VPN just under fire today, right? Because they started to evolve, and so to me, that antivirus to EDR, like, it is like not even a question, certainly today, but honestly 5 years ago it wasn't a question. You had to make that change because the threat actor was getting ahead of you. And the other thing too with that too, that people should realize is, like, you didn't have much under an antivirus, where in EDR you got a lot more telemetry, you got a lot of ability to rapid response because you had more data to kind of see things. You could feed things quicker and much cleaner into your SIM tools, things like that, right? So the technologies, certainly there's other benefits to it. And I see the same thing here with going from, VPN to kind of the CSE in our case, or some kind of service edge solution itself, is that I think we're at that point already where your VPN certainly served a purpose, and it certainly had its time, but things are changing. Threats, look, I believe it's something like within 48 hours, threat actors move right on once they get in, where before they used to wait and had this plan, and it kind of took a little while. And now they're just moving faster. AI is partly behind that, as well as, just it's helping them in other areas. And so you have all of those changes coming now. And so I see really this year going into next year is really that point where you just need to make that transition already, right? That you need to evolve. And so much like your antivirus was a thing in its day, it too now evolved into EDR, and nobody says that antivirus anymore, but when that trend, I think we're at that transition at VPN and CSE. Is I think we really have to consider that this is, now is our time to make that change, and you need to, because threat actors they're always ahead of, one step ahead.
Go back to your comment earlier. We're at the end of the year. Lots of organizations will be planning their budgets for the next year, the roadmap. If you're a customer who's using traditional VPN connectivity, or you're concerned with your remote staff, whether they be in the office or working globally or throughout the geography that you operate in, there is a consideration around what does it look like for us to increase that security posture? How do we move away from specifically needing just username, password, hopefully multi-factor authentication, to a trust scoring, creating a tiered level of trust?
Yeah, and don't forget, earlier I talked about your CFO, that story there about getting, how you explain things. Here's another thing I would say, like CSE is a cloud version. So what does that kind of mean for maintenance for you? Your life's easier, right? Where on a hardware application, you have to actually test the patch, you have to plan it out. And if there's a lot of vulnerabilities happening, you're kind of doing, week after week, you might be doing, some cases where a cloud app, the patch and all that gets applied automatically. So it's less you have to do. So you get to go do more things, in terms of maintenance. So that's another like a benefit here that you can sell along to your CFO in terms of, the budgets and stuff like that, right?
That's great.
That helps you as well.
Moving the attendees up a little bit into the more strategic, like, hey, instead of administering a server that's running a virtual machine of a remote connectivity product, let's move you into building policies and helping have an outcome, right? You want to be compliant with control X, or you want to be able to give your users a certain level of access or performance. You can focus more on that, less on like administering this virtual environment. Visibility, we talked about being a big one, right? If you're a customer today or you're a client today looking for, how do I get visibility of what my remote users are using, right? Like, it used to be they're all behind the firewall and you could be like, oh, they're on YouTube, or oh, they're, accessing Facebook, or they're browsing LinkedIn or something. You used to have that visibility on the corporate devices. I think a lot of our clients in the remote shift lost all of that.
Sure.
It doesn't always have to be a control thing, right? There's some of it that's just, to your point, helping them have a good security posture. What happens if they click a phishing link and it navigates them to a command and control server or some sort of credential harvesting website? Does the user have to figure that out themselves, or is there some sort of software tool that can help them? And I think CSE stands in the place to do that well.
Yeah, definitely. I think every company I've been in, acceptable use policy said you can't be doing any of those things on corporate laptop, but people do, right? Through it does provide that insight and does help you there too as well. And like you said, you lost that because not everybody's coming through the firewall anymore, right? And so, a lot
of businesses are looking for ways to operationally make themselves more mature, so they're outsourcing services to Philippines or outsourcing services overseas in some cases. And for those clients, they have less and less control over those even individual devices. So I think having those security profiles, we've heard from many of our customers that being able to mandate some minimum level of security that's accessing their infrastructure gives them a lot more comfort.
Yeah, definitely.
So, I think that we're kind of wrapping up the tail end of it here, Wayson, but, I said at the beginning, replacing VPNs is a lot of times how we have our initial conversation around Cloud Secure Edge, the SonicWall Zero Trust Network Access product. But it is a little bit more about that, right? We're talking about, not being a perimeter-based solution. So that's what software technology or some sort of physical hardware device thing you mentioned that be kind of a pain in the butt to manage sometimes. Not session-based, that's like individual tunnels, right? Just tying it to a user in a single connection, but there's some inherent risk with that, because if that user's got that long Ethernet cable, it could be somewhere else and you don't really have much visibility in there. Location dependent. I don't know about, you worked with some mid-market organizations in the past, but that location, geography, the fact that we're globally distributed gives even a small business the ability to have a globally distributed workforce and have uptime, and they don't have to manage any of that infrastructure. And then continuous unified access models. We're talking about no matter who the user is, no matter what device they're connecting from, they're being put through the security posture and the security checks. Any parting thoughts on that, or any wrap up that I might have missed on that?
Yeah, I don't know about miss, but those are just all key points to consider, right, in this solution itself. And I go back to my evolution thing as well. Just, you have to change and move, and these are the realities behind that, right? And that, to me, this is where the next step of your growth and protection and lowering your risk and all of this comes into play. So yeah, these are all spot on. Right?
I got a good question from John here. I might take this one, Wayson. It's like, what's SonicWall doing to encourage long-term customers to make the change towards CSE, specifically those that are impacted by the SSL VPN issues earlier this year? John, there's quite a few promotions that are out there from a sales perspective to help make that transition easier. Some off the top of my head are, we've started including CSE licenses with our firewall bundles. So if you're buying a firewall bundle, instead of getting SSL VPN licenses, you now can get CSE licenses. So that's a way to reduce that upfront cost. We've also got some concessionary options for customers that were specifically impacted by the SSL VPN piece. So if you haven't looked into that, I think you can go to like sonicwall.com/concessions and you'll see a list of those, see if you qualify. And then additionally, we've made a lot of flexible purchasing options for our partner community as well as our clients, just for different buying models, right? Some people prefer to have these things in a monthly consumption where it's per user and they can fluctuate in quantities. Some organizations want to push it more towards a capital expense and buy in like 3-year increments. And I think we've done a really good job of giving you lots of flexibility and choice there. So if you haven't talked with your local SonicWall rep, or you haven't talked with your local SonicWall partner and by proxy the SonicWall rep, I would encourage you to just reach out and have a conversation, because we're doing, I would say, just about everything we can to make that transition as easy as possible. Candidly, for everybody on this call, it's better for us as a company when you're on CSE, because we can give you a better outcome, right? We're a security company. Our focus is providing the best security we can to our customer base, and we truly believe that that's through the CSE platform. So we're highly encouraged to help you all make that migration. So hopefully that answers the question, but John, I'll make a follow-up note for you. Make sure that at a minimum, your SonicWall partner can reach out to you, and hopefully the local SonicWall rep, so that we can have a conversation. I appreciate the question. Wayson, anything to wrap up there with?
No, just kind of reiterating what I said earlier about. I think we have to evolve as the security community and within your companies. And so I guess we'll go back to, like, I really think this is the year you need to really make that move and that shift. We're at that point. So I would just encourage you to do that. And my thoughts around the CFO, right? The person that controls money and building that relationship, if you haven't already, right? I think that's another key into getting you over the hump.
Yeah. I mean, all these things sound great, but until the financial decision's made, it's hard to move forward with them. So
yeah, unfortunately, that's just the reality we all have to deal with, right? Yeah. So we don't.
I think that operational piece is big. You mentioned about just building out the plan, and every company has a goal of something, right? Whatever that is. And I don't think a lot of times that on IT side, a lot of times the folks that drive that are technical in nature, and they're operators, but they don't really understand the communication towards, like, maybe like a board or a CFO or a business owner. And so your comment at the beginning, I think, is one way that individuals can level up their careers too, is how do you communicate these technical needs in a business outcome way? And so if I was going to give you the bullet point business outcomes that I think CSE helps solve, it's a reduction in your security risk. It's an improvement in employee productivity. It's a reduction in IT overhead around managing that, right? Yeah. And there's some additional visibility, I think, that you get from all of those services, which is maybe about products that we're not, or tools that we're not using. Maybe you find out that there's technology that is being used that could help your business or that could hurt your business. Yeah. Is there any other, maybe?
You can also sell defense in depth, layered security, those type of terms, right? In that your connection that you were trying to do with just the VPN and getting encrypted access. Not only you have that, now you can see the different types of tools you're using, or you have in front of. You can set those security posture, those threat levels, right? So those are different layers where with VPN you just had one, right? And so to me that you can even sell that, right, as your different layers of security that this is just part of your program.
Hey, we bought that super expensive EDR tool, but people don't have it deployed everywhere. How do we enforce that it's deployed? We replace this VPN, we get all these cool things, plus we can enforce that they're using it, right? Or, hey, all of our employees are supposed to be working from the geographical United States, but I saw that an entire sales team was in Cabo for the weekend. Are we sure that we want them accessing our data down there, right? Like those type of things.
Definitely.